The Truth Girls.
Hi everyone, Truther Girl Sonia here. It's really late at night. I'm kind of thinking, what am I doing pulling out my camera? But you know what? Like, this kind of blew my mind, okay, about the Mandela Effect. I'm a pretty skeptical person, you know? And I had done a video before where I had been looking at all these things about the Mandela Effect, and I was like, you know, it seems like either people don't know their history or they just don't remember what the thing was called, and now they're like, no, it was always depends, but really it was depend. But then I guess when you talk about the product, you talk about in a plural, like, because you don't go pick up one depend. I guess you could, but usually you pick up a whole pack of them so that you go get some depends, you know, stuff like that. And then I saw this woman, she was saying her husband isn't her husband anymore because his whole narrative had changed. And I thought, well, yeah, that's pretty weird. I mean, if that happened to me in my own life, I think I'd be pretty convinced about the Mandela Effect. And then I thought, well, you know, or she could be making it up, or she seemed really sincere. Or, I don't know, maybe like she's got memory problems. I mean, you know, you think of these things, but I pretty much figured, you know, she sounds sincere, and it is really weird. So, you know, maybe there is such a thing. Maybe there's something going on. But it hasn't happened to me yet, though, right? Until the other day, something really weird happened. Well, it was a while ago now, like a couple weeks ago. So I went to a friend was having a party. I went to her party, and I'm up on the roof with a couple of guys. Don't get any funny ideas, they're just my friends, right? Like, they're just having a beer up on the roof, we're just talking. Like, these are people I've known, like, from the time I was really young. So up there actually were like two people that I've known since we were like 6 years old. They're like my brothers, my little brothers. And so one of them, well, his name's Eric. You don't know who he is, so I'll just use his real name. Otherwise, it's going to confuse me. So Eric is there, and the other one, Alistair. So Eric is sitting there, and he's having a beer, and we're talking about my dad. My dad passed away a few years ago, and he was a super cool guy. And these guys knew my dad. Like, Eric just loves my dad. And so, you know, Eric is talking about my dad, and he starts talking about my dad's story. And see, my father, he's a Polish Jew from the town of Łódź, which was on the then German-occupied side of Poland. But he was born in Białystok, which during World War II was at that point occupied by the Russians. And he like really didn't, you know, look Jewish. He was tall, blonde, and blue-eyed. And he had a big Polish nose. He had like a very Polish... Okay, he had like a Polish-looking face, let's just say, okay? And he looked Polish, just everything. And he didn't speak with like a Jewish accent because they never spoke Yiddish. And his sister was like dating a Polish guy, and apparently she looked like me. Except with blue eyes and tall, and like they're all tall and blonde and whatever. So like they could pass as Poles, you know? So when they signed the paper that the next day the Jews were going to have to wear the star, my father decided, this is not for me. This is what he told me. I mean, you know, when you have a parent that went through something like World War II and running away from the Nazis and ending up in a gulag, which I'm going to tell you about. You know, you've heard this story many times. Like, your whole life you've heard over and over all these things, right? So what's weird is that that night I found out the story had changed. So the story was that when they said in the paper that they're going to have to wear the star, my father, and his words were, this is not for me. This is what he always said to me. And that he left with his cousin Adam the next morning, and they just walked right through, even though there were Nazis, like, left and right. They were lining up Jews. They were making them dig trenches and stuff like that. These people all had the star. My father just walked right through the town. Nobody thought he was a Jew because he didn't look like one. So he just walked, kept going. And they got into the eastern part of Poland. They got to Białystok. Now this night, Eric is telling me that my father had to wear the armband or the star or something. And I'm like, no, he never wore it. Because the day that they announced they'd have to wear it the next day, that's when my father left. Like, I've heard this millions of times. So I'm thinking, okay, Eric, you know, maybe he has the story wrong or whatever. Or he's had a couple of drinks. Eric, if you're watching this, I love you, but you were a little tipsy. So I was just like, whatever, Eric's been drinking, and like maybe he's got it mixed up. You know, it's my dad, I should know, right? So then there's more. So now my father ended up on the Russian side, and he ended up in the gulag. And what he had told me was that after he'd been on that side for like a year, he'd been with his relatives and he'd been with people and he'd been chopping wood to earn his room and board or whatever. At some point, he went into a police station to ask a question about something. And when he got in there, they started asking him questions, and they found out that he wasn't registered, and he was from WWII. And at the time, like, everybody was supposed to register. That's what the Soviets said, you know, you all have to register with the government. And my father, rebel that he always was, or maybe he was just lazy and he didn't have it together, but anyway, he didn't register. So then he goes into a police station, and what he told me, what I've heard my whole life, was I asked them questions, and then they started asking me questions, and they basically detained him, was what he said. And then they wouldn't let me go, he said. And then, you know, they like put him in a holding cell, and then they had this, like, he said it was like a kangaroo court trial with all these people that were being detained. And they're like 8 years for you, 2 years for you, 6 years for you, and it was just really random. And he was asking somebody else, so how many years did you get? How many years did you get? And the guy goes, it doesn't matter, we're all going to die. So, like, I've heard this story so many times. So he said it was because he went in the police station to ask a question. It was just, like, really, you know, wrong place at the wrong time. And he went to the gulag, and he was there for 2 years. And then he said they were liberated. And, you know, then he left, and then he joined the Polish division of the British Army. So I knew that after my father was released from the gulag, but before he got into the army, he was on the street. At this point, he was about 20 years old, and he spent some time where he was like homeless, and he used to have to go in, like, he was a thief. He would have to like go into people's houses and like try to find some bread that he could eat or some coins or something like that. But it wasn't like he was going in there to steal stuff just for whatever. He was really trying to survive. It was World War II, right? So I knew that he was doing this kind of stuff. And I knew that, like, when they'd be selling bread, he'd like stick his hand in, and with one hand he'd pull out bread and the other hand he'd pull out money. And another time, he always told me that story. And another time he told me a story about how he stole a couple of like roast chickens, and the cops came after him, and he ran, and he jumped on a train with the chickens, and he was sitting on the back, and the cops were like, whatever, in like, you know, Russian, and he was just sitting on there like eating his chicken, like, screw you guys. And he ended up in a totally different place because he got on that train. So he told me all these stories, but from what he had told me always, he ended up in the gulag because he went in that police station to ask a question. So this night at my friend's party, Eric is telling me that my father was in a gang, like a street gang, and that he got arrested for selling illegal vodka and bagels. And I was like, no, what are you talking about? That's impossible. My father got arrested for going into the police station, and then they wouldn't let him go. And Erica's like arguing with me. So I'm thinking, well, yeah, like, Eric's tipsy, right? And why is he arguing and arguing? It's my dad, I would know, right? So I decided to finally just let it go, you know. I was just like, oh, whatever. I'm not going to get into it with him. Let him think what he wants. I'm like, sure, Eric, my dad was in a gang, whatever. But he was telling me, my father was selling illegal vodka and bagels. And he was telling me he had like this jacket. And he was like, hey, you want some vodka, you know? And then like, no, maybe bagels more your style. I was wondering, like, illegal bagels? Why would it be illegal to sell bagels? And why would you, I mean, if you had something pricey like vodka, why would you have bagels too? And like, in your coat? And my dad was like a hobo, so like, can you imagine like a hobo coming up to you and he's like, hey man, you want bagels? And you're like, whew, I don't think so. I'll pass on that one. And he's like, oh, go like reach in the back of his pants. Oh, I got some string cheese in here to go with them. I mean, who sells bagels out of their coat? Like, what kind of a hobo does that? Okay, the vodka, I get it, it's like drugs, but bagels? So I was like, this is the most ridiculous story I've ever heard in my life. Eric, you're so drunk, just stop, you know? But he's insisting this is true. So I thought, well, there's an easy way to settle this. I'm going to call my brother and I'm going to find out. And my brother's going to be like, Eric doesn't know what he's talking about. Bagels and vodka. Bagels in his pants. Oh yeah, I got one right here. I got a little twisty bread for you here. So anyway, I finally just call my brother the next day and I'm like, what's up with this? You know, I know Papa's story really well, and Eric is telling me that he didn't get arrested walking into a police station. He got arrested and sent to the gulag for selling illegal vodka and bagels. And my brother's like, yeah, that's what happened. What? I mean, look, you know, I've heard this story how many times in my life? And I'm like, whoa. What do you mean, yeah, that's what happened? And Eric's telling me my Papa was in a gang, and he's like, yeah, he was in a street gang. What, before he got sent to the gulag? 'Cause that's really weird. He was on the street after being in the gulag, is what he told me, until he got in the army. And my brother's like, no, he was in a gang, and like he just confirmed the whole story. So that is absolutely bizarre, because my father told me, like, he went over to Bialystok and he was staying with relatives, and he was like, you know, going to people's door, like, do you need wood chopped or whatever? And then he just went to the police station that day. And like, I remember everything that he told me, because you know how parents are, and like, especially your old dad, like, repeats the same story a million times. I'm like, yeah, I know. They said it doesn't matter how long you got, we're all going to die. Like, I heard that so many times. And like, he never told me anything about being in a gang or selling vodka or nothing. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is really weird. That's my dad's story that like, my whole life, I heard him telling the story. And now all of a sudden it's changed. And also the part about him wearing the star or the armband. You know, he made a point of telling me always about how he left because they were announcing that in the newspaper, and he never wore it. If he had had it on, he wouldn't have been able to just walk through the town and walk out. He never wore it. And now apparently, according to Eric and my brother, he did wear it. This is very strange. Also, the story of his liberation was weird. There was a treaty that decided that all the Poles in the gulag would be liberated so that they could then join the Polish army. Eric that night was telling me that a couple of guys actually went to the gulag and told them, you have a choice, you can stay here or you can come and join the army. Like, as in right away, go straight to the army. And that my father went with them. But the story he had always told me was that they were liberated and they were just let out, and then he tried to get into the army and it took a while. Well, actually, he told me because he was with a couple of Jewish guys, and every time they would realize they were Jewish, they wouldn't let any of them sign up. So he ditched those guys because, like, our last name is not Jewish, and like I said, he didn't look Jewish. So he finally ditched those Jewish guys who looked Jewish and had Jewish names, and went and signed up by himself, and that's how he got in the army. But it was like in the interim between being released from the gulag and getting in the army, that's when he was on the street and like sneaking around and stealing things. Whereas in this version of the story, he was already involved in like a gang before, and then that's why he got sent to the gulag. So, I mean, everything is just totally switched around, and wearing the armband, and then like being liberated to go directly to the army. Like, the whole timeline has changed. So, like, there's only two possibilities. Either my dad didn't tell me this story, which I really doubt, because he did tell me. He told me a lot of things, because I asked him about a lot of things. But either he, for some reason, he didn't tell me, or it's the Mandela Effect. Because, you see, you could say, like, well, maybe he didn't, my brother was like, oh, maybe he didn't want to tell you he was in a gang. Why not? He already told me that he was a sneak thief. He was like creeping around people's apartments, stealing things to survive. He told me about other things too that happened. People he was involved with and stuff. So why wouldn't he tell me he was in a gang? Why wouldn't he tell me he got arrested for selling vodka? It doesn't make any sense. So like, what is going on here? Because this is my dad's story that I've known my whole life, and now apparently it's changed. So, you know, I can't just chalk it up to Eric being drunk. Anyway, it's weird. Let me know what you think. And thanks for liking and sharing this video. And I'll see you next time.
Truth girls.